Hello and welcome. It is Big Talk with Todd and Noah, presented by Xfinity 10G Network. We welcome you back. Episode number 8. We're more than halfway through the college football season at this point. It's hard to believe. I know that we've mentioned it to each other, but once you get going with these seasons, they fly. They fly by.
Yeah, they do. And, this is when it really starts to get fun. It starts to feel more like fall. There's a little crisp coolness in the air and the leaves are changing. And then the games just seem to get more and more meaningful, the further on you go. And, week 7 was pretty wild. I mean, we had, 2 games across the country that ended on a Hail Mary. There were a couple games with just ridiculous comebacks, so it was really an exciting week of games. And of course, there were a couple thrilling games that went down to the wire as well.
Yeah. What stood out to you in particular from last week?
Yeah, I mean, the Oregon-Washington game lived up to the billing. Everybody thought that it was going to be a great game and 2 high-powered offenses, 2 outstanding quarterbacks, and it was exactly that. It was a shootout between those 2 teams. Both quarterbacks played extremely well, and it's ironic that they both played extremely well on the same day when Caleb Williams was struggling. And I think that really hurt his Heisman or chances of repeating as the Heisman winner. And meanwhile, Michael Penix Jr. probably took a step forward in that race, even though there's a lot of big games left to be played. So, but I thought Bo Nix and Michael Penix Jr. put on a show. I know Dan Lanning took a lot of heat for going for it on 4th down 3 times and failing all 3 times. You could probably make an argument for all 3 decisions. Obviously, they were aggressive decisions, particularly the last one, in the field position, going for it on 4th and 3, trying to ice the game. And, that gave Washington another shot. It only took them 2 plays to take the lead, but they still had a chance to tie it and go to overtime, but they missed a field goal. So it was a great football game, and both teams are really good. And, so to me, that was the game that stood out. That and the dominant fashion that Notre Dame rebounded in their win against USC as well.
Yeah. Before we move on to Notre Dame USC, just anything else you want to hit on with Washington and Oregon? Just the fact of, okay, where does this put Washington moving forward the rest of the year? I know a lot of people were hoping they'd be ranked even higher than they are in this week's poll. But it does look like Washington and realistically still Oregon are legitimate contenders for the rest of the year.
Yeah, I think so. And, ironically, USC, the game they lost, as ugly as it was not a conference game. So they're still kind of where they want to be, but they've got a lot of things they got to answer and things they got to figure out going forward. I just think that Oregon and Washington look very solid right now. And, the Pac-12 is one of those leagues where everybody plays each other, so there's going to be some heavy hitting games, down the road still. Oregon State, don't even count them out. They lost the one to Washington State up in the Palouse, and they've won every game since. They had a huge win this past weekend. So, they're a team to be contending with as well in the Pac-12. So it's going to be, we've said this already. It's the last year of the Pac-12 as we know it, and they're really going to go out with a bang.
Yeah, arguably the best year we've had of that conference in quite some time. Speaking of, USC, as mentioned, falls 48-20. A lot of people are looking at what USC did to hurt themselves, and rightfully so. It's the first time that Caleb Williams had 3 interceptions in a game. He had 1 all season coming into the game. A huge performance from Xavier Watts defensively for Notre Dame. 2 interceptions, a scoop and score in the 4th quarter. He was outstanding. Sam Hartman wasn't necessarily eye-popping in his numbers, but he controlled the game when he needed to control the game. He came up with plays. Audric Estime had 2 touchdowns. So, you can look at the USC miscues on one side, but I think you got to give Notre Dame a lot of credit after the way they played really the last couple of weeks after the Ohio State game, barely getting past Duke on the road, which is a very good team, top 20 team, and then losing to Louisville, who turned around and had that letdown loss to Pitt this past week. But give some credit to Notre Dame for the way they handled a rivalry game at home in front of their fans, and they delivered.
Yeah, they had to respond, and they did. And I think primarily it was the Notre Dame defense, that really played lights out in the ball game. Yes, Caleb Williams made some uncharacteristic mistakes, but he made those mistakes because he was harassed and harried all evening. I mean, this Notre Dame defense controlled the line of scrimmage. They sacked him 6 times, and he's an elusive guy. That's not easy to do. Forced the interceptions. This is Notre Dame only had 251 yards of total offense and won 48-20. So, I mean, obviously it was the defense that really was the star of the game for Notre Dame. And, not just, I mean, Caleb Williams will be fine. He'll bounce back and he'll play well. They play Utah this week. He'll probably play well. The offensive line, everybody's talked about the defense for USC being the problem. The defense wasn't horrible in this game, but the offensive line was. So, I mean, they've got a lot of soul searching to do this week because, they've got Utah at home. And as we all know, they're not an easy out. They are a physical, hard-nosed team that plays to win.
Yeah, and last year they were the Trojans' kryptonite. So be curious to see if Caleb Williams, especially considering the performance he just put together at Notre Dame Stadium, can he get his mind in the right place, try to keep the emotions to a certain degree to allow himself to go out there and perform. You mentioned that it's a non-conference loss, so in terms of the Pac-12, it leaves them in a good spot. But in terms of their ultimate goal of getting to the college football playoff, they have to be unblemished the rest of the way if they want to get there.
They have to be unblemished, and they have to look really good because that was a humiliating loss in South Bend. That doesn't take anything away from Notre Dame. Notre Dame's a good football team, but the perception of USC right now is that program that they're kind of in disarray, and I don't think that's true, but that's the perception coming out of that game.
You mentioned Oregon State beat UCLA in a top 20 matchup 36-24, Arizona over Washington State, and then the big shock in the Pac-12 this week, Stanford over Colorado. Yeah. After Colorado was up 29-0, there was a lot of stories and let's call it hoopla that was surrounding the Shedeur Sanders Instagram story at halftime when they're up by nearly 30. It's the largest comeback in Stanford history. Credit goes to the Cardinal for the way that they battled, for the way that they fought all the way through it and found a way to win it. But 3 other scores that have implications, certainly. And that last one, just in terms of bowl eligibility, which felt like the main goal for Colorado going into this season was, hey, after the atrocity of what they put on the field last year, for Coach Prime to come in and get them to a bowl game should have been considered a win. They start strong. They had 4 wins coming into last week. That would have gotten them 1 win away. And instead, they kind of tossed that opportunity aside.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, doesn't it feel like Colorado has had like a full season of experience already? 100%. I mean, they've had everything, right? The huge opening win. They got blew out in Oregon. They had to fight to beat Arizona. They've had the double overtime against Colorado. They've had everything, right? Now this. I mean, it's a horrible loss for Colorado, number one. But you do have to credit Stanford for not only fighting back, just fighting, period, not quitting, coming out of the locker room and saying, okay, that couldn't have been any worse in the first half. Let's treat this as a 30-minute game. And they fought and clawed their way back in it. And, I can't even pronounce the kid's name, the receiver. I mean, maybe he's been working on it.
I believe it's Alec Iomanor.
Well, however you say it, I mean, he came out of nowhere, right? Redshirt freshman, 13 catches, 294 yards, and 3 touchdowns. The last one, he's like spinning off of Travis Hunter's head.
Unreal.
So it was an incredible individual performance by him, but quite the win for Stanford.
Yeah, we're gonna have to confirm that because if he can play at that level moving forward in his career. I mean, he had 294 yards, 13 catches, 3 touchdowns, and that one over Travis Hunter was one of the catches of the year around the country. Basically pinned it on his helmet and then ripped it away. Yeah. So remarkable stuff. A 29-point comeback is nothing to sniff at. So yeah, I think Colorado now it's going to be a fight to get to those 6 wins, and it's a shame considering the way they started the season. But Coach Prime will be as energized as ever. You can promise that much. And Shedeur Sanders will be ready to go into Brady mode and try to get his lick back, so to speak. ACC, by the way, also I find has been fascinating this year, just because Florida State continues to cruise. They absolutely just blitz Syracuse 41-3. And then UNC now still undefeated. Now you've got Tez Walker back, and he got 3 touchdowns in his game back here. They beat a top 25 team in Miami, which, again, if Miami had just taken a knee the week before, it would have been a battle of unbeatens and a top 20 matchup and all of that. But 41-31, Florida State is clearly in the driver's seat in the conference, but I like what UNC is doing, and they've got a great quarterback. They got their top weapon back, and right now, Mac Brown's team's just playing good football.
They are. They're playing good football. They're playing good defense. It's not just Drake May in the offense, but certainly that offense is bolstered by Tez Walker. He's a game changer. He's a unique combination of size and speed and ball skills. So he is a great dynamic weapon now added back to that offense. So they are fun to watch. And obviously when you win like they're winning right now, it just builds confidence, and you just believe so much more in what you're capable of doing. So credit to them, and to Mac Brown for putting it together this year.
One last score from the ACC, Pitt over number 14 Louisville, 38-21. And look, I think that obviously the win last week over Notre Dame was massive. They were undefeated on the season. They got inside the top 15, but it's year one under Jeff Brom. You can't expect that they're never going to have a letdown this year, that they're going to somehow shock the world and go undefeated, or shock the world and find themselves in the ACC championship game. The fact that they had gotten to the point that they were at was already remarkable. So I still think, you can say, hey, that's a bad loss. It is. It's not a bad loss just because they're in year one, but I think there is still some grace that they deserve as a result.
Yeah, for sure. And, the problem is it's hard to get your team up to play at their best A-level game week after week, and especially when they're hearing so much, whether it's on social media or kids in class, whatever, telling them how good they are and how great that win over Notre Dame was, which it was. But now you got to turn around and get ready to play another ACC opponent. And Pitt is not having a good year, but Pitt is tough. They're physical, and they always seem to win a game like this that they're not supposed to. A few years ago it was Clemson and Death Valley. They always seem to muster up this kind of win somewhere in their season. And it was a good win for Pat Narduzzi's team because they have been struggling, particularly on offense.
Very much so. In the SEC, so we've been talking a lot, especially with the three teams in the Big Ten East, just about rankings and that number one ranking in particular. Georgia does beat Vanderbilt, but it wasn't simple, 37-20. And the big story coming out of this game is Brock Bowers. And that was really the argument for Georgia all year was, all right, look, they might not look the same, but they've got maybe, if not the best, maybe the second best weapon in the receiving game behind Marvin Harrison Jr. in all of college football in Brock Bowers. And the high ankle sprain that he suffered in the game eventually required a minor surgery that he just had that's going to keep him out maybe for the rest of the regular season. And they're going to their bye week so they can prepare a little bit, but that's just such a brutal blow for a Georgia team that, look, is still going to have immense talent. It's still going to have a stingy defense. It's still going to have a lot of what other teams wish they could, but you're missing now a guy that's the legitimate game changer on your squad.
Yeah, and he's bailed them out on several occasions. He's a guy who, when things are starting to get a little stagnant, you just find ways to get him the football, and he makes good things happen. And, I can remember the first time I heard about this surgery that they do to, fix or expedite the recovery of a high ankle sprain. Tua had it done at Alabama. And I think he missed 4 games, and then was able to come back. It was kind of amazing that he was able to come back. He still wasn't completely 100%.
Right.
And for a quarterback, maybe it wasn't as important. For a guy who's got to run and break and make cuts and, run after the catch, it might be a little bit more difficult for Brock Bauer. But Georgia will be seriously affected by his absence. There's no question about it because he's such a dynamic player. But the East is not what it's been. It's not as strong as maybe some people thought. But you've got Florida coming up in a couple weeks, that big game in Jacksonville, and Florida's playing a little bit better. Graham Mertz is actually playing very well right now at quarterback for Florida. So, that's the game that looms ahead for them. But right now, Georgia they will definitely feel the effects of no Brock Bauer.
Yeah. So Florida is on October 28th, and then 3 ranked opponents, Missouri, Ole Miss, and at Tennessee. That's their next 4 games.
Yeah.
The surgery is expected to keep Bowers out for 4 to 6 weeks. But I mean, you just never quite know how everybody recovers. Everybody's got a different timeline, especially with an injury like that. So we'll keep tabs on it, but it'll be interesting to see how the Bulldogs do without their stud tight end. Alabama, I know I say it every week, and I'm going to say it every week. I know that they started slow. I know that they had a loss to Texas early in the season, and I know they haven't looked dominant. But they keep finding ways to win, and they're going to keep finding ways to win, and they're going to be right back in the same spot at the end of the season because that's what Nick Saban does. So, yeah, they only beat Arkansas 24-21. I get it. It wasn't a controlling victory.
Right.
But a win's a win. They're 6-1, and Jalen Milroe is just finding enough. He's getting enough done to get them victories.
Yeah, I mean, he makes big plays, and then he makes some big mistakes. They have not protected him all that great. I mean, he gets sacked a lot. They're not necessarily a powerful running team, but at times their defense has been dominant and they have been able to shut people down when they need to. So they're really leaning on the strength of their defense and their quarterback's ability to just make some dynamic plays, either as a runner or a thrower. It's not always pretty, but they're getting the W's. And, I think they're a team and he's a quarterback that the more they play, the better they should get, and so by the end of the year, they should be about as good as they can be. So we'll see. But credit to them finding ways to win. The other team that you mentioned a moment ago that we should probably at least recognize because they bounced back, and that is Missouri. They lost a crazy game to LSU at home where, LSU came back late and beat them. And they got past that, mentally and emotionally, went to Kentucky and beat Kentucky. And so now they're sitting there, with one loss. So it's, I think they're a better football team than people maybe realize.
Very much so. They've had a tremendous year, and that is, to your point, not an easy thing to do after an emotional loss like that. A lot of times you get that boomerang loss. Didn't happen for the Tigers. Big Ten, the big three in the Big Ten East, all just simple victories. Michigan, Ohio State, Penn State. Michigan over Indiana 52-7, Ohio State over Purdue 41-7, and then Penn State over, as the former Syracuse lacrosse coach John Desko would call them, UMass, kind of like Foo Fighters. It's a little bit different. It was 63-0. Penn State, Drew Aller, another 3 touchdowns through the air, another one on the ground. Not really a whole lot to say about those 3. We just kind of knew what to expect from all 3, and they got it done.
Yeah, not a lot. I mean, the thing with Michigan, and we're going to see them again this week. I don't know if I read this or heard this, but it kind of describes them to me. They aren't necessarily the fastest starting team, but eventually they pull away and then they pummel you, And so by the time you get to the fourth quarter, I mean, most teams they're playing are crying uncle. It's just they've had enough. They've had enough of the line. They've had enough of the physical defense and all the fresh bodies, and you just kind of break people. And that's kind of what they've been able to do. And you can say, well, they haven't played anybody. But yes, their schedule is backloaded. We're going to start to find out what Michigan really is. We're going to start to find out what Penn State really is now, as soon as this week. But that's the way their schedule is. The bottom line is they've beaten everybody they've played by at least 24 points, and then they play a ton of people. So it could have even be beating people by 40 points, but they sub and they play their backup quarterback and back up everybody. And so they're a really good football team, and they just stay about their business and ultimately wear people down.
Yeah, the key in all of this is they can start slow against teams that they're clearly head and shoulders better than. And the question is, can they do that against the Penn States, the Ohio States, and beyond? It's funny, though, every week, I swear, our stats and spot are upstairs. They're always like, Michigan's only up by 7 right now. It's the second quarter. And I think we both look at them like, let's be a little patient here. Let's see what happens. And then within 15 minutes, like, they're up by 35. Yeah, that's what happens with them. So more business as usual.
Ohio State, I mean, that's a good win over Purdue, 41-7. The thing that's concerning, and obviously don't know the whole situation right now. Watching their film against Maryland, I thought their offensive line struggled to do anything in the run game. I just thought that Maryland's defensive front 7 really handled the line of scrimmage, and Ohio State was not able to run. And, if they have that kind of a problem against Penn State, and are one-dimensional, I think Penn State's too good on defense to be one-dimensional. Now, they've gotten away with it so far, but now they also, Travion Henderson didn't play for the second week.
Yep.
Mayan Williams didn't even make the trip. And the third guy got hurt in the game against Purdue. So I don't know what the status or the health status of their running back room is right now. And I'm not sold on the cohesiveness of their offensive line in the run game right now. And that would be of concern getting ready for this big game coming up.
We'll delve deeper in a moment there. Just 3 more scores in particular to hit on real quick before we move on to previews for this week. Our game was fascinating. We weren't really sure exactly what Illinois was going to look like heading to College Park and what Maryland was going to look like coming off their first loss of the season to Ohio State. Illinois wins on a game-winning field goal by Caleb Griffin, 27-24. There's a lot to break down in this game. Let's first just state the obvious. Maryland was missing 5 starters.
Yeah.
Let's start there. 2 high-impact starters on the offensive end and 3 high-impact starters on the defensive end. 5 guys that mean a lot to their team. But Illinois was missing a number of guys who are legitimate impact players, especially on that defensive front. And so Luke Altmaier, the 1 interception was a tip ball. Otherwise, he took care of the football. Yeah. And that was really all Illinois needed. It's really all they've needed all season to this point, and their defense had played a pretty good game overall.
Yeah, I thought they did, and I thought they played good defensively the week before against Nebraska. They just didn't get much going offensively, but I thought they played a complete ball game. And it was one of those things you could just feel this happening. And Mike Loxley, we had shots of him, and you could tell just by his facial expressions that he knew they were letting this team off the hook because they had a chance. There was a big swing right at the end of the first half, and then Illinois was able to come out and score to start the third quarter. And really, Maryland had a chance to be up, 21-7 maybe?
21-7, right? Yeah.
21-7. Instead, it's 14-14. And so, right there in that moment, Maryland let Illinois stay in the ball game. And when you do that to a team that's not expected to win or not expected to pull the upset, it gives them a great boost, great momentum, great confidence. They came out and played the second half and deserved the win. They really did. They played well.
From the Maryland side, real quick, we talked to everybody there, and their goal this season was to compete for a Big Ten championship, compete in the Big Ten East. This is a crushing loss in terms of that in particular, but they get the bye week this week. Then they go to Northwestern. That's a winnable game after their bye week, would get them to bowl eligibility. And now, after that, we showed it, their schedule is basically the 2 shots that they want. They got Penn State and they got Michigan, and they've got them at home. And so it's still a team, certainly, if they can get healthy, they get Corey Dyches back because it felt like they missed him dearly, especially on third down, especially in the red zone this past week. They get those defensive backs back who mean so much to their team overall, especially Dante Trader, who's a great tackler in that back line. They are talented. They are plenty talented to compete with those types of teams. The question is whether or not they can find a way to actually beat one of them. And if they play anywhere close to what they did last week, they got no shot.
Yeah, and the problem is the reason this last loss was so crushing is now, to even be considered having a chance, they have to win both of them. They have to beat Penn State and Michigan and hope that Ohio State loses another one. So it's one of those things where they really dug themselves a hole. Now they can still have a great season and find their way into a really nice bowl game, but it's going to be very, very difficult for them to compete for a Big Ten championship because of that loss to Illinois. They could have survived the one to Ohio State if they come back and take care of business down the stretch. But now with 2, it's going to make it very difficult.
No doubt. Michigan State, who we will see this week as well, had a big-time lead on the road at Rutgers. And everybody was saying, all right, maybe it is the same old Rutgers after all. Maybe we overestimated, overjudged, overbelieved in what Greg Schiano was putting on the field. Not so fast.
Not
Scarlet Lights, the Scarlet Knights. Shout out to Catherine Tappan. Shout out RU Rah Rah. They come all the way back after trailing 24-6 going into the fourth and win it 27-24. Largest crowd at Rutgers since 2015. Over 52,000 people there, and they got to see a wonderful comeback victory for the Scarlet Knights. Kyle Monungai with a big game, 148 yards on the touchdown. Caden Hauser was the one who started for Michigan State and actually looked strong to start the game. 2 touchdowns, ran for 1. But, man, what a win for Rutgers.
Yeah.
What a win for
Yeah.
RU.
And you know what? The funny thing is they announced that crowd, but then I think a good portion of that crowd left before the comeback started. And so they didn't have a huge crowd there at the end, but the people that stayed, they got to see quite the comeback and quite a treat. And, part of it was helped by some special teams miscues. The comeback really started. It was the punter for Michigan State fumbled a snap. It was, it was wet weather. It wasn't great weather. Fumbled the snap in the end zone. It was recovered for a touchdown. Later on, there was a botched kickoff return. It was kind of a sky kick behind the front line, and they did not field it. And Rutgers was able to recover that and then ultimately score on the winning touchdown on the following play. And so great win for Rutgers. I mean, and they got a chance to keep it going. They go to Indiana this week. They're sitting there at 5-2. They could get bowl eligible this week and also, kind of position themselves very nicely.
Pretty remarkable. The one stat that stands out, fourth quarter yards.
Yeah.
Michigan State gets outgained by Rutgers 120 to -20 in the fourth quarter. So credit to Rutgers. Tough loss for the Spartans. They felt like that was one that could at least give them some positive feeling heading into this week against Michigan. And then the last game that we need to at least hit on, Big Ten West. This was a massive deal just with implications on who could eventually find a way to win the Big Ten West. Iowa. I'm trying to find the right words here, Todd. I'm trying to figure out the right way to describe it. They win 15-6.
Yep.
They win 15-6. The drive to 325, that feels like it's a distant memory at this point.
That's fantasy world.
It's almost irrelevant at this point because Iowa now has somehow won another game. They only have one loss on the season, and you look at their schedule, they could, if they just take care of what they can take care of, which we know they're capable of, they could finish 11-1 on the season.
Yeah. Just
looking at the rest of their slate. Remarkable stuff for Iowa now with a backup quarterback, Deacon Hill, who had 37 yards in the game, and they're ranked in the top 25 now, rightfully so, at 24. 15-6 final score. I mean, really, whatever your thoughts are here on this game, go for it.
Yeah, well, a couple things. First of all, and I don't know that this would have made a difference, but Wisconsin's quarterback Tanner Mordecai went out in the second quarter with as we find out now, is a broken hand. I know exactly what that injury is like. I mean, I did the same thing when I played for the Chiefs. I didn't break my hand, but I shattered the ligaments in my right thumb. Just followed through and hit a helmet after you release the football. Really no way to avoid it, But that's an unfortunate injury because he had actually been playing pretty well. I think he'd done a nice job in his first year. He was an experienced guy, a veteran guy who, played a lot of good ball at SMU. So now they have to go to Braden Locke, who's a transfer from Mississippi State, who's talented, but just didn't have the same kind of experience. And Locke played, under those circumstances, put up decent numbers against Iowa's defense, but just hard to score on those guys. And, the other thing I'll say, okay, you mentioned 37 yards passing, right? This is the stat line for a winning team. Right, 6 of 14 for 37 yards passing.
He actually improved his completion percentage from the week before.
Here's another stat, and I think this guy. I'm serious. This guy should have the biggest NIL deal of any Iowa football player. Tory Taylor, the punter, punting is winning. The T-shirt.
Oh yeah.
10 punts. Now, normally, if you punt 10 times, that means you're losing this game, right? Not for them. He punted 10 times. He averaged 50.6 yards per punt, and 6 of them were inside the 20. I mean, so, they play to their strengths, which is their defense and their punter, and they pin you back and they make you go the long field against their defense, and eventually, they force you into mistakes.
So every time we talk to Kirk Ferentz and we bring up Tory Taylor, he basically says, I've had 2 of the greatest punters of all time, Tory Taylor and Reggie Roby, and both of them were weapons for our team. That's 1. 2, I got to double check on the stat that I saw, but I know that Fox put up the graphic during the game that at the time when Iowa had an 8-point lead or so, I think under Kirk Ferentz, they were 68-2 at any point during the game. So I believe they're now 69-2 when they have at least an 8-point lead under Kirk Ferentz. That's remarkable stuff.
Yeah, that is remarkable. Really.
But it also is a perfect microcosm for what that program is. And so congratulations to the Hawkeyes, another big win, 15-6. They are in the driver's seat in the Big Ten West. And now we go to the previews for this week. Let's start with them. Minnesota travels to Kinnick, number 24 Iowa, NBC on 3:30. Old school for both these teams. They want to ground and pound. They want to run the football. We'll see what Minnesota has available in terms of health. We know that they had a little bit of depth issues a couple of weeks ago before their bye week against Michigan. This is an interesting game for a variety of reasons, but now Iowa, because they're in the driver's seat, they've got a little bit more pressure on them to take care of business.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard for me to not think that Iowa is going to control that football game. Minnesota, I think that they've got some issues on offense. Your quarterback is still kind of feeling his way through it, and he will not have an easy day against this Iowa defense. Playing at home, Iowa just doesn't look anything like they did when they got blown out 31-0 up in Happy Valley, on that night game, in the whiteout game. They've gotten some health back at their running back position. So they've actually got more than one guy they can rotate in there. Yes, they're on their backup quarterback. They don't have Cade McNamara anymore, but their defense is starting to take the ball away. When we had them a couple of weeks ago, they hadn't had many takeaways. They had a few in our game, and they've continued that trend now. So I think Iowa's playing Iowa football, and they're going to be very difficult to beat, especially at home.
Williams and Johnson in the backfield, over 700 yards on the season for Iowa. Defense now with 11 takeaways on the year. So just like that, you turn around, you say, okay, this is Phil Parker's defense coming to fruition again. It'll be interesting, but again, that's 3:30 on NBC. The big one in the Big Ten is the Big Ten East showdown. Number 7, Penn State. Number 3, Ohio State. Penn State goes on the road. This feels like that prove-it moment for Penn State. They haven't had quite that level yet. As you mentioned, they played Iowa in the whiteout game. They controlled them. They dominated them. But this is the game of, all right, you want to show that this is a different team. You want to show that this is James Franklin's most talented team. You want to show that you're a title contender. Go to Columbus and win on the road.
Yeah. Well, and I think they're built to play in this game. I think they match up really well with Ohio State. Again, I think the biggest key in this game, I don't think it's going to be a high-scoring game. I think both defenses are playing at a very high level. Ohio State's defense is playing remarkably well, and the thing they're doing a great job of that they struggled with at the end of last year was giving up big plays. They are not allowing big plays. I mean, they're keeping everything in front. They don't have huge sack numbers or takeaway numbers, but they are playing really, really good defense, good team defense. And Penn State, it's a different style. They're way more aggressive, attacking, blitzing, pressure. They've got 2 corners that they trust can play man-to-man all over the place. So Manny Diaz he's very aggressive, but they're both outstanding defenses. So I think this is going to be a very low-scoring game. I think it's going to be determined and decided in the trenches, and who controls the line of scrimmage. Like I mentioned earlier, I've got some concern about Ohio State's offensive line. I think they're fine pass protecting, and Kyle McCord continues to play well and throw for over 300 yards. And they're good pass blockers, although this will be the best challenge they faced in the Penn State pass rush and their edge guys. But they're not running the football very well, and they've got injuries in the running back room. You can't be one-dimensional and beat either one of these teams. The defenses are too good. You have to have balance throwing it and running it. And I think Penn State maybe is in a little better position right now to be balanced than Ohio State is.
Chop Robinson, Adisa Isaac could have big games, no doubt, for Penn State. The question for me, we've seen Kyle McCord now in some big moments, and he's come through. We go back a couple weeks, of course, to Notre Dame. He has the huge final drive, makes some massive throws on 3rd and 4th down, leads them in for a game-winning touchdown. Against Maryland, they go down early in that game. He doesn't panic. He finds this guy, Marvin Harrison. So McCord's now been in some big moments. We haven't quite seen Drew Aller have to handle those exact type of feeling and energy and all of that on the road hostile environment in a big game that if you win, you put yourself in a really good position. If you lose, you're really behind the eight ball now, both in the Big Ten and overall for the college football playoffs. So I'm curious how the youngster handles something like that.
Yeah, he played extremely well against Iowa, probably the best team that they faced, right? And he was patient. He took what the defense gave him. He ended up throwing, I think, 4 touchdown passes in the game, but he didn't. None of them were big explosive plays. He was very patient, very deliberate. It was a rainy night. He was very consistent. He didn't play as well on the road against Illinois or on the road against Northwestern, quite frankly. And their offense showed inconsistencies at times. This will be the best team that they've played and the most hostile environment that they've played in. So he's going to have to play well, and they are going to have to run the football and again, have balance and not put all the pressure on their young quarterback. But again, I think Penn State, they're built for this game. I think they match up better with Ohio State than maybe they do with Michigan. And so I think it's a situation where they should feel very confident going into Columbus about their ability to win.
Yeah, I do agree with all of that. That again is noon on Fox. Both teams 6-0. Both teams looking for a statement victory just past the midway point of the season. Other games outside the one we'll do just to hit on: Rutgers at Indiana, Wisconsin at Illinois, Northwestern at Nebraska. Any of those that particularly stand out? You mentioned Rutgers earlier, just as a chance to get bowl eligible for the season.
Yeah, I think that's a cool story. I think Greg's got them going in the right direction there, and a really good chance to make it with another win. Indiana's struggling, even though they're playing at home. And Nebraska, has a good chance to get a win at home. I think they're 3-3 right now, coming off a bye week.
Yep.
They have a chance to get on the winning side. And again, remember, this is a team that has not had a winning season or been to a bowl game in 6 consecutive years. So Matt Rule, it's not happening overnight, but I do believe that he will get it done there. And I said this in the very beginning. I think Nebraska will be a bowl team, and I still think they will be.
Yep, they're right there knocking on the door. All right, 7:30 NBC game we will be at. Michigan at Michigan State. You can look at the matchup on paper and say, all right, Michigan is going to overpower, or Michigan's going to do this, or they're too talented, and Michigan State's in disarray. I don't care. When you've got a rivalry like this, when you've got a trophy game at stake, all that type of stuff, you throw a lot of that out the window. And especially when it's Michigan State, especially considering the history, especially considering some of the moments of this matchup, I just find that that's fun. And I know that that's when chaos generally ensues. That's when craziness generally happens. So, I mean, we can analyze the game itself, but you played in rivalry games, you know how different they feel.
Yeah, and I hope you're right. I mean, because all that emotion, all that hype, and all that can only get you so far, and then you've got to execute. And right now, Michigan is executing at a very, very high level on both sides of the ball, and Michigan State is not. So I'm interested to see. They made the switch to Caton Hauser at quarterback. He played pretty well last week. He's going to have to play really well again this week. But again, Michigan is a team right now that is hitting on all cylinders. The only thing, their running game maybe is not as dominant as it was a year ago or the year before that, but J.J. McCarthy is playing lights out, and Roman Wilson is playing lights out. So their passing game is definitely, much better than it's been. And their defense has been stellar. I mean, their defense, the last time a team through 7 games has held their opponents to 10 points or fewer through 7 games was 1981 Clemson in their national championship season, that defense. So again, they haven't played the best teams on their schedule yet, but they have suffocated everybody that they've played.
Yeah, they're really good. There's only so much that we can say. There's only so many superlatives that we can use. You just have to watch them to recognize just how special they are and how many guys they play. Like they don't get tired because they just keep rolling different groups in. They keep rolling different skill guys in. They keep rolling different defensive linemen and linebackers. I mean, everybody eats for Michigan.
Right.
And there's something to be said about that. The line is currently Michigan favored at 24.5, which is probably fair considering the way this season has gone so far. But I'm excited to go. I'm excited to feel this
Oh
rivalry.
yeah,
I've never
yeah.
felt this rivalry, and I'm excited to just kind of see what it's all about.
Yeah, it's a cool stadium. I mean, hopefully we'll have a great crowd. And the key for Michigan State in a game like this, you have to get off to a good start. You
Yep.
got to have some things happen good for you early, and then maybe you've got to find a way to steal a couple possessions, whether it's a fake kick, or a fake field goal or an onside kick, something to where you can maybe steal a couple possessions and get your crowd energized early. So, but it's a good rivalry. They don't care for each other all that much. Going back to the little brother comments from Mike Hart, who's the running back coach at Michigan right now. Tom Izzo will be there. He's a big supporter of the Spartan football team. He'll probably be on the sideline walking around. So hopefully it'll be a great night, but it's a fun place for a game.
It would be a heck of a way for Harlan Barnett to get his first win as the acting head coach over at Michigan State as well. Again, 7:30 NBC is when kick is. 7 o'clock is when College Countdown will begin, and you can find us there for all the action. Maria, Joshua, Mike Robb, I believe, unless he has another assignment, which is very possible, and Matt Castle. So we've got the full squad there. We should have a lot of fun with it, and hopefully you'll join us as we head to our Xfinity Big Connections. And that's really here. I would say it's right here, Xfinity, big connections on and off the field. But the Paul Bunyan Trophy, Michigan leads the all-time matchup 72-38-5, so 5 ties, dating back to 1898. Trophy series in Michigan's favor, 39-29-2, since the beginning of the Paul Bunyan Trophy, so to speak, in 1953. And Michigan won last year's matchup 29-7 in Ann Arbor. Of course, there was the scuttlebutt after the game. There was the jawing back and forth outside the locker room. There were a number of Spartans that got suspended for the rest of the season. The altercation led to 8 suspensions in particular, and Jacoby Windman was one of them who was injured, and we'll see if I believe he could be injured long term for Michigan State. He was big for their defense, and they really didn't recover fully without him. But there's just so much. 2021, both teams were undefeated, top 10 matchup. Kenneth Walker had nearly 200 yards, and we talked to Michigan a couple weeks ago about that one, and they told us that it was the turning point of what has now allowed them to be the title contender that they are. They had a players-only meeting after that one, said, we're not going to let this define us, and they haven't. So a lot of credit to the Wolverines for how they've handled it. But there's just so much history with the Paul Bunyan Trophy, and I think that is a very fair place to go with these big connections.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a good one. And remember, I don't remember what year it was. I just remember my former partner, another Syracuse guy, Sean McDonough, the one with the punt, the crazy play, that
the voice crack.
Yeah, the voice crack introduced the first surrender cobra, I think, ever, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, they've had some classic back and forth in this series.
Yeah, so hopefully we'll get something special in this one as well. But should be fun, as mentioned. Excited to get over there to East Lansing, get a feel for what that vibe and environment looks like, and we'll see if the Spartans can make it interesting over the course of the game. Any other games that you want to hit on before we get out of here outside the Big Ten? Tennessee at Alabama, Duke at Florida
that'll
State,
be a fun
Utah, USC, and Oregon's back in action against Washington State. Anything in particular that stands out?
Just the Tennessee, Alabama, just because I did that game a lot of times, it's kind of, it doesn't always fall this way anymore on the schedule, but if for years and years, the tradition was the third Saturday in October was Tennessee and Alabama, and just love the colors, love the pageantry of that game. The winning team, probably not politically correct anymore, but the winning team has cigars in the locker room,
Nice.
So it's kind of a tradition. But yeah, last year was one of the epic games of the season when Tennessee beat Alabama on a field goal at the end of the game. And so Alabama will be looking for a little revenge this year in Tuscaloosa.
Yeah, that was a game that catapulted Tennessee up, and that was kind of the start of the questioning of Alabama, which has continued into this year. And so we'll see what happens there. Tennessee is looking to kind of signify themselves for the rest of this season, and Alabama just trying to continue to move forward with that. So we'll see what that looks like. Duke at FSU. We'll see if the Blue Devils have another upset up their sleeves here.
That's going to be a good game. I think
the line
on that is 14, and I'm not so sure. I think Florida State will win, But I wouldn't be too surprised about taking Duke in the points on that, because Mike Elko's defense they're good. I mean, he's an outstanding defensive coach, and he figures out a way to take away what you do best. And so I think Duke will be very competitive in that game. I think Florida State will win, but I think Duke will be very competitive.
And your last thoughts, Utah and USC, just given what happened with those two teams last year, and certainly USC coming off the big loss.
Well, I do think USC will rebound. I think Caleb Williams he'll be his old self in this game. But Utah is good. I mean, the question for Utah still is, is Cam Rising back? Is he not back? Because without him, they are pretty stagnant on offense right now. And I think they're going to have to score to beat USC this week.
No doubt. All right. Another one in the books. Week 8 ahead. Looking forward to it. A lot of fun stuff as the college football picture really starts to crystallize itself. Heisman stuff crystallizing. College football playoff not that far away. We're in it now. We're in the thick of it. Cold. Todd's wearing sweatshirts. I mean, this is what we've got now. This is it. Big time stuff around the college football world. Well, we appreciate you for tuning in. Big Talk with Todd and Noah, presented by Xfinity 10G Network. Make sure you download and subscribe on the NBC Sports YouTube channel, wherever you get your audio podcasts. And as always, we will talk to you next week.